They laughed at the little mechanic, but she fixed what 20 professionals couldn't. Emily Johnson held the wrench in her small hands, greasy and dirty, while 20 grown men watched her with a mix of disbelief and scorn. The girl, just 8 years old, had just announced she knew how to fix the yellow 1973 Ford Mustang that had been sitting idle for 3 weeks in the garage. "Did you hear what this little brat just said?" laughed Mike, the most experienced mechanic on the team. "She's gonna fix what we couldn't." The other men burst into laughter that echoed through the bay of Wilson's garage, located in the industrial district of Detroit. The sound of their mockery mixed with the hum of running engines and the clinking of tools, creating a symphony of scorn that made Emily grip the wrench even tighter in her small hands. "Get out of here, kid. This isn't a playground," snapped Robert Wilson, the garage owner, a 52-year-old man whose scowling face had grown even harsher lately. But Emily didn't move. Her brown eyes shone with a determination that contrasted with her young age and the oversized grey overalls she wore. Hand-me-downs from her grandfather. She stepped closer to the Mustang and pressed her ear near the engine, just like she'd seen her grandfather Frank do hundreds of times before the accident that left him blind. "The noise isn't coming from the carburetor like you think," she said firmly, though trembling inside. "There's something wrong with the transmission." "Enough!" Robert marched toward the girl, fists clenched. "Either you leave now or I'll drag you out myself." The tension in the air was thick. The other mechanics stopped working to watch the scene unfold. Some looked uncomfortable with their boss's reaction, while others still snickered, amused by the situation. "Hold on, Robert," interrupted Charles, a veteran mechanic with graying hair who'd worked there for over 15 years. "Let the girl speak. It won't hurt to listen." "It won't hurt?" Robert turned to Charles, eyes blazing with anger. "This car belongs to Mrs. Grace Williams. She's our last hope to save this garage. If we don't fix it by Friday, she won't invest the promised money, and we'll have to close for good." Silence fell over the garage. Everyone knew how dire the financial situation was. Wages were 2 months behind, suppliers had cut off credit, and the bank was threatening to foreclose. Emily used the quiet moment to crouch down and look under the car. Her trained eyes, used to watching every move her grandfather made before he lost his sight, caught a detail the professionals had missed. "There's oil dripping in the wrong spot," she murmured, more to herself than to the others. "What?" Charles knelt beside her. "Where do you see that?" Emily pointed to a small oil stain on the floor, positioned in a way that only someone her height, looking from a specific angle, could notice. "Right there. You were looking in the wrong place." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. Charles grabbed a flashlight and shone it where Emily had pointed. His eyes widened when he realized she was right. There was a small crack in a part they hadn't properly checked. "My God," he whispered. "What is it?" Robert asked impatiently. "The kid's right. There's a leak here we missed." The other mechanics crowded around the car, curious to see what had caught Charles's attention. Emily Johnson stood there, watching the reactions of the men who had mocked her just minutes earlier. "This doesn't prove anything," grumbled Mike. "Anyone can spot a leak. The hard part is fixing it." "Then let me try," Emily said simply. "Absolutely not." Robert Wilson slammed his fist on the car's fender. "I won't let some kid mess with Mrs. Grace Williams' car. If she finds out some brat laid hands on her late husband's Mustang, she'll run out of here and never come back." The mention of Mrs. Grace's husband added weight to the situation. Everyone in the garage knew that car wasn't just a vehicle to the wealthy widow. It was the last physical reminder of the great love of her life, the businessman Walter Williams, who had passed 6 months ago, leaving her alone with a fortune and a shattered heart. Emily bit her lower lip, a habit she'd developed when nervous. She knew she had to prove herself, not just to the mechanics, but most of all to herself. Ever since her grandfather Frank had lost his sight in an accident at the old shop where he used to work, she had become his eyes, helping him with small repairs they did at home to supplement his meager retirement. "Does Frank know you're here?" asked Charles, who knew the girl's grandfather well. "He's asleep," Emily lied, omitting the fact that she had snuck out of the house for the first time in her life. The truth was that Frank Johnson, now 73, spent his days sitting on the porch of his modest home in Flower Gardens, listening to the radio and remembering the days when he was considered one of the best mechanics in the area. The accident that left him blind had happened 2 years earlier when a loose part flew off and struck his eyes. Since then, he had been consumed by deep sadness, feeling useless and dependent on his granddaughter. "Listen, kid," Robert said, softening his tone. "I get that you want to help, but this is grown-up work. Go home and play with your dolls." "I don't play with dolls," Emily shot back with a firmness that surprised everyone. "I've been learning mechanics from my grandpa since I was 5. "Your grandpa can't see a thing anymore," Mike said with unnecessary cruelty. "He doesn't need to see to teach me," the girl replied, her eyes glistening but her voice steady. "He taught me to listen to what the engine is saying, to feel where the problem is." Charles stood and wiped his hands on his overalls. There was something in the girl's determination that reminded him of himself when he was young and everyone doubted his abilities. "Robert, how about giving her a chance?" he suggested. "If it doesn't work out, we lose nothing. If it does..." "If it works, I'll eat my hat," Mike laughed, sparking more chuckles from the others. Robert Wilson studied Emily's face for a long moment. There was something in those brown eyes that unsettled him deeply, a glimmer of hope he had lost long ago. Ever since his daughter Catherine had died in a car accident 5 years earlier, he had become a bitter man, unable to tolerate children around him. "No," he said finally, "and that's my final word on the matter." Emily felt tears burning her eyes, but refused to cry in front of those men. She turned on her heel and walked toward the garage exit, clutching the wrench like a lost trophy. "Wait, child," called a woman's voice from the garage entrance. Everyone turned to see Mrs. Grace Williams walking toward the group. At 68, she maintained the natural elegance that had followed her since youth, despite her completely white hair and the wrinkles marking a still beautiful face. She wore a simple but well-tailored navy blue outfit and carried a leather purse her husband had given her on their last anniversary together. "Mrs. Grace," Robert stepped forward, trying to hide his nervousness. "You're early today." "I was passing by and decided to stop in," she said, observing the scene with curiosity. "What's going on here?" "Nothing serious, ma'am." Robert tried to downplay it. "Just a child who got lost and—" "I didn't get lost," Emily interrupted, finding courage in the presence of the elegant woman. "I came here because I know how to fix your car." Grace raised her eyebrows, surprised. She looked the girl up and down, noticing the dirty overalls, the small hands stained with grease, and most of all the determination shining in her eyes. "Is that so?" she said with a gentle smile. "And how do you know that, dear?" "Because I listen to what the engines say," Emily replied simply. "My grandfather taught me." "Mrs. Grace, please don't take her seriously," Robert said hastily. "She's just a kid with a wild imagination." But Grace wasn't paying attention to Robert. Her eyes remained fixed on Emily, studying every detail of the girl who was the same age her granddaughter would have been if she were still alive. "What's your name?" she asked, bending down to the girl's level. "Emily Johnson. I live with my grandfather Frank in Flower Gardens." "Frank Johnson," Grace repeated thoughtfully. "That name sounds familiar." "He worked at Joseph's garage for over 30 years, Charles explained. "He was one of the best mechanics in the area before the accident." "Of course," Grace clapped her hands. "Frank Johnson. He fixed my husband's car many times. Walter always said if the car had a problem, just take it to Frank and he'd solve it." Emily's chest swelled with pride hearing those words about her grandfather. "So you're Frank's granddaughter," Grace continued. "Did he really teach you about engines?" "Yes. Ever since I was little, I've been with him in the garage, watching him work. Even after he lost his sight, he still teaches me a lot." Robert grew impatient with where the conversation was heading. "Mrs. Grace, with all due respect, we have qualified professionals here. We don't need a child." "Robert," Grace's voice took on a firmness that silenced him immediately. "My husband always told me the best mechanics aren't necessarily the ones with the most diplomas, but the ones with the gift of understanding engines. If this girl is Frank's granddaughter, maybe she's inherited that gift. But Mrs. Grace—" "Let her try," Grace said decisively. "If she can identify what's wrong with my car, I'll double my investment in the garage. A tense silence filled the room. Doubling the investment wouldn't just save the garage, it would make it the most modern in the area. And if she can't? Mike asked. If she can't, you keep trying like before, Grace replied simply. Robert found himself in an impossible situation. Refusing Grace's request would be throwing away the only chance to save his business, but letting a child touch the car of the wealthiest woman in town's late husband went against all his principles of caution and professionalism. All right, he finally said, his voice tight, but I'll supervise every move. Emily smiled for the first time since arriving at the garage. She approached the Mustang with the reverence of someone approaching something sacred, knowing that car represented far more than metal and rubber to Mrs. Grace. "May I touch the engine?" she asked politely. "You may, dear," Grace replied, gently touching the girl's shoulder. Emily opened the car hood and leaned over the Mustang's V8 302 engine. Her eyes traced every component with the expertise of someone who had grown up watching and learning. She closed her eyes and placed her hand on different parts of the engine, feeling the texture, the temperature, searching for signs only someone with a special sensitivity could detect. "What are you doing?" Mike asked impatiently. "I'm listening," Emily replied without opening her eyes. "My grandpa always said every engine has its own voice. When something's wrong, it changes its tone." She stayed like that for several minutes, her hand moving over different parts of the engine, completely focused. The men around her watched in silence, some skeptically, others with genuine curiosity. "There's something off with the oil pump," she finally said, opening her eyes. "The oil pump is working fine," Mike argued. "I tested it myself yesterday." "It's not the pump itself," Emily explained patiently. "It's the connection to the filter. There's a vibration that shouldn't be there." Charles stepped forward with a screwdriver and began loosening the oil filter bolts. When he partially removed it, dark fluid started dripping onto the floor. "My God," he murmured. The filter was loose. "But that's impossible," Mike protested. "I tightened it myself." "Sometimes filters loosen on their own when there's too much engine vibration," Emily said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "My grandpa taught me that whenever there's an intermittent electrical issue, it might be a mechanical problem causing interference." Grace watched the scene with a mix of admiration and nostalgia. The girl reminded her so much of her late granddaughter, who also had a natural curiosity and a special way of seeing the world. "You're a very clever girl," she said affectionately. "My grandpa's the clever one," Emily corrected modestly. "I just learned from him." Charles finished tightening the oil filter properly and signaled for someone to start the engine. The V8 roared to life with a deep, steady growl, none of the stuttering it had shown in recent weeks. "I don't believe it," Mike said, shaking his head. "The problem wasn't just the filter," Emily continued, showing she wasn't done with her diagnosis. "There's something else." "Something else?" Robert asked. "The car runs now, but it'll act up again in a few days if you don't fix the cause of the excess vibration." Everyone looked at her expectantly. "The motor mounts are worn out," she explained. "That's why the filter came loose. The extra vibration loosened the bolts." Charles checked the mounts and confirmed they were indeed more worn than usual. "How can an 8-year-old girl know this?" one of the mechanics muttered. "Because I pay attention," Emily replied simply. "My grandpa always said, 'Emily, engines don't lie. If you know how to listen, they'll tell you exactly what's wrong.'" Grace stepped closer and knelt beside the girl. "Emily, may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, Mrs. Grace." "Why did you come here today? What made you leave home and walk into a garage full of strange men?" Emily lowered her eyes, embarrassed. The question had touched on something deep and painful. "My grandpa's really sad," she said softly. "Ever since he lost his sight, he just sits on the porch all day doing nothing. He says he's no good for anything anymore, that he's just a burden." Tears began rolling down the girl's face. "But he's not a burden," she continued, wiping her nose with the sleeve of her overalls. "He's the smartest man I know. He taught me everything I know, and I wanted to prove to him that his lessons mean something, that I can use what he taught me to help people." The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Many of the mechanics present were fathers and grandfathers, and Emily's words struck something deep in their hearts. Robert stepped away from the group and walked to the garage wall, where a framed photo of his daughter Catherine hung. It had been 5 years since she'd passed, but the pain remained as sharp as the first day. He looked at the picture of the smiling 9-year-old girl, then at Emily, who was being comforted by Grace. "We'll replace the motor mounts," he said suddenly, surprising everyone. "What?" asked Charles. "We'll replace the motor mounts. The girl's right. If we don't, the problem will come back." He approached Emily, whose eyes were still red from crying. "You'll stay here and help us," he said in an unexpectedly gentle voice, "but on one condition." "What?" she asked, wiping her tears. "You'll teach me some of the things your grandfather taught you." Emily smiled through her tears. It was the first time an adult had asked to learn something from her. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. As the mechanics organized themselves to replace the motor mounts, Grace sat beside Emily on a low bench. "Tell me more about your grandfather," she asked softly. "He's the most important person in my life," Emily said, drying the last traces of tears. "My mother left when I was 3, and I never knew my father. It's just me and Grandpa Frank." "And how did you manage when he lost his sight?" "It was really hard at first," the girl admitted. "He was so angry, he'd break things, yell. I was scared. But then he started calming down, though he got really sad. Now he spends all day listening to the radio, saying he's no good for anything anymore." "But he taught you all this about engines even without seeing?" "He says he lost his eyes but not his experience," Emily explained. "He touches the parts and knows right away if they're worn or not. And he teaches me by touch, by sound, even by smell." Grace shook her head, impressed. She watched the mechanics working on her late husband's car and felt a strange emotion growing in her chest. "Emily, can I tell you a secret?" "Sure. This car was very special to my husband. He bought it used in 1975, right after we got married. It was our first car of our own. Walter took care of it like it was his child." "Is that why you were so upset when it stopped working?" "Exactly. It felt like I was losing another little piece of him." Emily thought for a moment before answering. "My grandpa always says cars hold the memories of the people who cared for them. He says that's why it's so important to treat engines well, because they can feel when they're loved." Grace smiled tenderly. There was a simple wisdom in the girl's words that touched her deeply. "Is your grandmother still alive, Emily?" "No. She passed when I was 5. It was right around the time Grandpa started teaching me about engines. I think he needed something to keep from missing her too much." "Do you miss her?" "I do. But Grandpa tells me so many stories about her that sometimes it feels like she's still with us. He says the people we love never truly leave us. They keep living in our memories and in the things we learned from them." Grace felt her eyes welling with tears. The girl's words echoed exactly what she'd been trying to tell herself about losing her husband. "Your grandfather is a very wise man," she said. "He is. That's why it hurts so much to see him so discouraged. He thinks because he can't see anymore, he can't help anyone. But that's not true. He still knows more about engines than anyone I've ever met." Just then, Charles approached them with a worried look. "Mrs. Williams, there's a problem." "What kind of problem?" she asked, standing quickly. "The motor mounts we need aren't in stock, and none of the shops in town have original parts for a Mustang 73. We'll have to order them from Chicago, and that could take a week." Grace's heart sank. A week would mean the car wouldn't be ready in time for the deadline she'd set for her decision about investing in the garage. "Can't we use adapted parts?" asked Robert, clearly concerned. "We could, but they won't be the same quality or durability," Charles replied. Emily, who had been listening to the whole conversation, stood from the bench and walked over to the adults. "Can I make a suggestion?" she asked timidly. "Of course, sweetheart," Grace replied. "My grandpa has a bunch of old parts stored in his garage at home. He kept everything from when he worked at Mr. Joseph's shop. Maybe he has the mounts you need." Robert shook his head skeptically. "Parts that old are probably deteriorated or useless by now." "My grandpa always took really good care of his things," Emily insisted. "He stored everything wrapped in oilcloth, in sealed boxes. He used to say you never know when an old part might save an engine. Grace glanced at her watch. It was 3:30 on a Wednesday afternoon. If Emily was right, there might still be time to get the parts and finish the repairs that same day. "It's worth a try," she said. "Can you take us to your grandpa's house?" "I can, but—" Emily hesitated. "But what, sweetheart?" "He isn't expecting visitors, and he gets a little embarrassed when strangers come by. Ever since he lost his sight, he doesn't like having people over much." Robert looked at Grace, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Going to a stranger's house in search of old parts didn't seem very professional. "Mrs. Williams, maybe we should just wait for the parts from Chicago," he suggested. "At least we'd have a quality guarantee." "No," Grace said firmly. "I want to meet Emily's grandfather, and if he really has the parts we need, why not try?" "But what if the parts are no good?" asked Mike. "If they're no good, we order them from Chicago and wait," Grace replied patiently. "But if they work, we save a week and meet someone who clearly has a lot of knowledge to share." Emily smiled in relief. The thought of bringing people to her grandpa and showing that his knowledge still mattered made her both anxious and hopeful. "Let's go then," she said, heading for the garage door. "Hold on," Robert said. "I need to lock up the garage first." "I'll stay here and keep an eye on things," Charles offered. "Take whatever you need and call me if anything comes up." The small group formed: Grace, Robert, and Emily, plus 2 mechanics Robert insisted on bringing as witnesses. They got into Grace's car, a discreet but comfortable black sedan, and followed Emily's directions through the neighborhood streets. As they drove, Emily grew nervous, wondering how her grandpa would react to the unexpected arrival of strangers. Frank Johnson had become more withdrawn and irritable since the accident, and she wasn't sure how he'd behave around other people. "It's right there on the corner," she pointed out as they approached Maple Street, a simple but well-kept residential road typical of the working-class neighborhoods in Detroit. Frank Johnson's house was small but well-maintained, with a front garden where a few rose bushes he had planted years ago with his wife still grew. The paint on the walls was slightly faded, but it was clear the property was cared for with love. "Here we are," said Emily, stepping out of the car. They walked to the front door, where Emily knocked 3 times in a rhythmic pattern, a code she had developed with her grandfather so he'd know it was her. "Emily," came a voice from inside, "you're back early from school today." "Grandpa, I brought some people to meet you," she called through the door. There was a long silence on the other side. "What people?" Frank asked, his voice wary. "They're from Wilson's garage. They need your help with a car." "I can't help anyone, Emily, you know that. Please, Grandpa, open the door. It's really important." After a few more seconds of hesitation, they heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. The door opened to reveal a man with completely white hair, average height, wearing a simple plaid shirt and dark dress pants. His blue eyes, though sightless, still held an intelligent expression. "Good afternoon, Mr. Johnson," Grace said politely. "My name is Grace Williams. Your granddaughter helped us at the garage today, and she said you might have some parts we need." Frank visibly tensed at the presence of strangers. "Parts? What parts?" he asked, fumbling to find the doorframe for support. "Motor mounts for a 1973 Ford Mustang," Robert explained. "Mustang 73, Frank repeated thoughtfully. "V8 302 engine." "Exactly," Robert confirmed, surprised by the precision of the question. "I do. I've got several sets of mounts stored away." He hesitated for a moment. "But I'm not sure if they're still any good. It's been a while since I've touched any of this." "Could we take a look?" Grace asked gently. Frank sighed resignedly. "Come in, but excuse the mess. Ever since I ended up like this, I can't keep the house the way I used to." They stepped into the small but cozy home. The living room was simple, with old but well-kept furniture. Family photos lined the walls, including a few of Frank in mechanic's overalls standing beside classic cars. "The garage is this way," Emily said, leading the group through the kitchen to a door at the back of the house. Frank followed slowly, feeling his way along the walls. When they reached the garage, Grace couldn't hide her surprise. The space was meticulously organized, with shelves full of labeled boxes, tools hanging on panels, and a workbench that, despite not being used in 2 years, was still spotless. "My goodness," Robert murmured. "This is more organized than most professional garages." "My late wife always said I was obsessive about organization," Frank said with a melancholic smile. Everything had its place, every part had its label. Emily hurried to one of the shelves and began searching through the boxes. "The mounts are in that section over there," Frank directed, pointing accurately despite his blindness. "Look for the box labeled Engine Suspension, Ford." Grace watched the interaction between grandfather and granddaughter with emotion. Their mutual affection and understanding were unmistakable. "Found it!" Emily exclaimed, pulling a box from the shelf. Frank stepped closer and reached out to touch the box. "This is the right box," he confirmed, running his fingers over the raised labels he had stuck on years ago. "The engine mounts for the Mustang are in here." Emily opened the box carefully and revealed several parts wrapped in oiled cloth, exactly as he had described at the garage. "Can I take a look?" asked Robert. Frank nodded, and Robert picked up one of the wrapped pieces. When he unwrapped it, he found an engine mount in perfect condition, as if it had been made recently. "This is unbelievable," he said. "This part is flawless." "I've always taken care of my tools and parts," Frank explained with evident pride in his voice. "My father taught me that a mechanic is only as good as his tools." "How many of these mounts do you have?" asked one of the mechanics. "Let me see." Frank moved closer to the box and began feeling through its contents. "I have a full set. 4 mounts, all original Ford." "Original Ford?" Grace stepped forward, intrigued. "Yes. Back then, I worked at an authorized shop. I always kept the original parts left over from jobs. You never know when they might come in handy." Robert examined all the parts and confirmed they were in perfect working condition. "Mr. Johnson, these parts are exactly what we need. How much do you want for them?" Frank fell silent for a moment, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "I don't want money," he finally said. "What do you mean?" Robert asked, surprised. "These parts have been sitting here for years, doing nothing. If you can use them to fix a car, take them. I don't want anything in return." Grace was moved by the old man's generosity. "Mr. Johnson, that's not right. These parts have value, and you should be compensated." "I don't need money," Frank insisted. "My pension is enough for me and Emily. What I need is to feel useful again." He paused as if gathering courage to continue. "For 2 years, I felt like a burden. I can't work anymore. I can't help anyone. If these old parts can be useful for something, then at least a part of me still matters." The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Everyone understood that this wasn't just a business transaction, but a deeply meaningful moment for a man who had lost not only his sight, but also his sense of purpose. "Mr. Johnson," Grace said softly, "you're not a burden. Your granddaughter is one of the smartest, bravest girls I've ever met, and she learned all of that from you." "Emily is a good girl," Frank said with pride, "but I can't teach her anything anymore. I can't show her how to do things." "Grandpa, you still teach me so much," Emily protested. "Every day, you teach me something new." "But it's not the same, Emily. I can't anymore." "Mr. Johnson," Grace interrupted, "can I make you an offer?" Frank turned his face toward her voice, curious. "What kind of offer?" "I'm investing in renovating Wilson's garage. We're going to turn it into one of the most modern shops in the area, and I'd like you to be part of that change. Me, but how? I can't see anymore. You can teach. You can pass on all your experience to the younger mechanics. You can guide, supervise, share knowledge. There are many ways to contribute besides working directly on engines." Frank was silent, clearly moved by the proposal. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. Emily showed me today that knowledge isn't lost with age, or even with the loss of sight. Your experience is worth far more than any diploma. But I don't even know if I remember everything right." "Grandpa," Emily said, taking his hand, "you remember everything. Every time I have a doubt about something, you know the answer right away." Robert, who had remained silent throughout the conversation, approached Frank. "Mr. Frank, I admit that when I saw your granddaughter in my garage today, my first reaction was irritation. But she taught me an important lesson about humility and recognizing talent wherever it may be. He hesitated for a moment before continuing. I lost my daughter 5 years ago. Since then, I've become a bitter man, unable to see the good things in life. Today, watching Emily and hearing about you, I realized I was wasting an opportunity to honor my daughter's memory by helping other kids. Frank listened attentively without interrupting. If Mrs. Grace is really going to invest in the garage, I'd like to create an apprenticeship program for young people interested in mechanics, and I don't know anyone more qualified than you to help develop that program. An apprenticeship program? Frank repeated. That's right. Teach the basics, pass on hands-on experience, share the secrets you only learn after years of work. You could be the heart of this program. Emily squeezed her grandfather's hand, barely containing her excitement. What do you think, Grandpa? You can teach people about engines again. Frank stayed silent for a long moment, processing everything he'd heard. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but emotion. I don't know if I can do it, he finally said, his voice choked. You can, Grandpa, Emily said firmly. You always succeed at everything you set your mind to. And we'll be there to help, Grace added. This won't be a responsibility you carry alone. Frank took a deep breath and straightened his shoulders, regaining some of the proud posture he'd lost in recent years. All right, he said. I accept. A huge smile spread across Emily's face as she hugged her grandfather tightly. Grace smiled too, feeling she was witnessing something very special. Then it's settled, she said. Let's take these parts, finish repairing the Mustang, and start planning the garage's future. They picked up the engine mounts and got ready to leave, but before stepping out of the garage, Grace approached Frank again. Mr. Frank, can I ask you something? Of course. How did you manage to keep everything so organized even without your sight? Frank smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. My late wife helped me reorganize everything right after the accident. She made braille labels, rearranged things to make more sense, created a system I could use. It was the last gift she gave me before she passed. She must be so proud of you now, Grace said softly. And of Grandpa too, Emily added. Grandma always said you were the best mechanic in town. Now you'll get to teach everyone to be as good as you. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. The return to Wilson's garage was filled with a sense of positive anticipation. Emily sat in the back seat chatting excitedly with her grandfather about plans for the apprenticeship program, while Grace drove, thinking about how the afternoon had turned into something far more meaningful than just a simple car repair. When they arrived at Wilson's garage, they found Charles and the other mechanics eager to hear about their mission. Did you get the parts? Charles asked as soon as the group stepped out of the car. We did, Robert replied, showing the box with the engine mounts. And we got much more than that. While the mechanics were getting ready to install the original parts in the Mustang, Grace helped Frank settle onto a nearby bench where he could follow the work by sound. Mr. Frank, said Charles, approaching, I remember you from when I used to work at Joseph's garage. You fixed my first bike, a red Harley-Davidson Sportster. I was 16. Charles Mendonça, Frank said immediately. Of course I remember. Your bike had a carburetor issue, and you wanted me to fix it for free because you didn't have any money. Charles laughed, surprised. You really remember? And do you remember letting me pay in 3 installments? I do. And I remember you brought your girlfriend to introduce her to me the next week, all proud of your running bike. That's right. That girlfriend became my wife and the mother of my kids, Charles said, moved. It all started with that bike you fixed. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the Mustang's engine starting. The V8 rumbled smoothly, with no trace of the issues it had before. Perfect, said Mike, clearly impressed. It's running like it's brand new. Grace walked up to the car and placed her hand on the hood, feeling the steady, gentle vibration of the engine she had loved hearing when her husband was alive. Walter would have been so happy, she murmured to herself. Did you say something? Asked Emily. I said my husband would have been happy to see the car running perfectly again. Did he love this car? Adored it. We'd spend hours on Sundays just washing and waxing the body. He said taking care of the car was like meditation. Emily smiled understandingly. My grandpa says the same thing. He says when you take good care of an engine, the engine takes good care of you. Your grandpa is a wise man. He is. And now he'll be able to teach others how to take care of engines again. At that moment, Frank stood from the bench and slowly walked toward the sound of the engine. Excuse me, he said to Mike. Can I put my hand on the engine? Mike looked at Robert, who nodded in approval. Of course, Mr. Frank. Frank placed his hands on different parts of the engine, listening carefully to each sound, feeling every vibration. It's perfect, he said after a few minutes. But there's a small adjustment that can be made to the carburetor to optimize performance even more. What kind of adjustment? Mike asked, curious. The air-fuel mixture is a little rich. It's unnoticeable under normal conditions, but on steeper climbs or with a heavy load, it'll burn more fuel than necessary. How can you tell that just by the sound? One of the younger mechanics asked. 50 years of experience, Frank replied simply. When you work with engines that long, they start speaking to you. Can you show us how to make the adjustment? Mike asked, genuinely interested. Frank hesitated for a moment. I can guide you, but I'll need someone to be my eyes. I can do it, Emily offered immediately. No, sweetheart, Frank said gently. You've already done so much today. Let one of the mechanics help. Charles stepped forward. I can help, Mr. Frank. It'd be an honor. Over the next few minutes, Frank guided Charles through the delicate carburetor adjustment, explaining each step, each tweak, each sign that indicated when the mixture was just right. Now turn the screw a quarter turn to the left, he instructed. Charles obeyed. Listen to the engine now, Frank said. Everyone paid attention. The rumble of the V8, already smooth before, became even steadier. Incredible, Robert murmured. It really improved. The difference is subtle when the engine is idling, Frank explained, but on the road it'll be significant. Grace watched the entire scene with growing admiration. She was seeing not just an experienced mechanic, but a true master of his craft. Mr. Frank, she said, do you have any idea how many young people could benefit from this knowledge? I never really thought about it, he admitted. I've always worked alone, focused on my own jobs. Well, it's time to start thinking, Grace said enthusiastically. Knowledge like yours shouldn't go to waste. Robert approached the group. Mrs. Williams, now that the car's fixed, can we discuss the investment details? Of course. But first, I want to know one thing. Are you all truly willing to turn this garage into a center of excellence for mechanic training? Absolutely, Robert replied without hesitation. And do you accept Mr. Frank as the technical supervisor for the training program? Robert looked around, observing the expressions of the other mechanics. They all seemed genuinely excited about the prospect. I accept on behalf of the whole team, he said. And you, Mr. Frank, will you mentor a new generation of mechanics? Frank stayed silent for a moment, clearly moved by the responsibility being placed on his shoulders. I accept, he finally said, but on one condition. What is it? I want Emily to be the program's first official student. Grandpa, Emily began, surprised. No, Emily. You have a natural talent that shouldn't be wasted. If we're going to train a new generation of mechanics, you need to lead the way. Grace smiled warmly. Perfect. Emily will be our first official apprentice. The girl looked around, seeing all the adults smiling at her with approval and respect. It was a moment she would remember forever. Now, Grace said, shifting to a more businesslike tone, let's talk numbers. Robert, how much do you need to turn this garage into what we're envisioning? Robert did some quick mental calculations. For new equipment, renovations, setting up classrooms, I'd say around $500,000. Done, Grace said without hesitation. But not 500,000. $1 million. $1 million, Robert nearly choked. That's right. 500,000 for renovations and equipment, and 500,000 for a maintenance fund and scholarships for underprivileged kids who want to learn mechanics. The silence that followed was pure shock. Even in their wildest dreams, they hadn't imagined an investment of this scale. Mrs. Williams, Charles said, his voice trembling, are you sure? Absolutely. My husband always said money sitting in the bank does no good. He'd be happy to know our fortune is being used to give opportunities to young people like Emily. I don't know how to thank you, Robert said, genuinely moved. No need to thank me. Just make sure this place becomes everything we're dreaming of today. Frank reached out until he found Grace. Mrs. Williams, I promise I'll dedicate the rest of my life to making this project succeed. I know you will, Mr. Frank. And your first student will be the best advertisement this program could have. Everyone looked at Emily, who was still holding the wrench like it was a royal scepter. Are you all sure I can really be part of this? She asked shyly. I'm absolutely sure, Grace replied. Today you proved that age doesn't matter when you have talent and determination. And besides, Frank added, you have something no school can teach. You listen to what the engines say. Emily smiled, feeling for the first time in her life that she truly belonged somewhere. So when do we start? She asked excitedly. Tomorrow, Robert answered. Let's start planning the renovation and the education program. And I'll begin organizing all the knowledge I've accumulated over the years, said Frank. I'll create a teaching method that works for both those who can see and those who can't. How so? Asked Grace, intrigued. I've discovered that when you can't see, you develop other much sharper senses. Maybe I can teach students to use touch, hearing, even smell to diagnose engine problems. That would be revolutionary, said Charles, amazed. It wouldn't be revolutionary, Frank corrected modestly. It would just be a different way of doing the same things we've always done. The sun was beginning to set when the group finally decided to wrap up for the day. The Mustang was running perfectly, the plans for the garage's future were set, and most importantly, several lives had been transformed in those few hours. Mr. Frank, said Grace as they prepared to leave, would you like me to give you a ride home? No need, Mrs. Grace. Emily and I will walk. It's close by, and I need to process everything that happened today. Are you sure? I am. Besides, it's been a while since I've taken a walk with my granddaughter. Today is too special to end any other way. Grace hugged Emily tenderly. See you tomorrow, dear. Get some rest, because tomorrow we start working for real. See you tomorrow, Mrs. Grace, and thank you for believing in me. Thank you for showing me it's never too late to start over. Frank shook hands with all the mechanics, thanking them for their warmth and respect. See you tomorrow, everyone. Let's make this garage a place that'll be remembered for years to come. See you tomorrow, Master Frank, said Charles, using the title everyone would adopt from that day forward. Grandfather and granddaughter left the garage hand in hand, walking slowly down the sidewalk. The sun dipped behind the buildings, painting the sky in orange hues that reflected in the oil puddles on the asphalt. Grandpa, said Emily as they walked, are you happy? Happier than I've been in the last 2 years, my dear. Me too. Today was the best day of my life. It really was a special day. But do you know what was the most special part? What? Seeing how much you've grown. Seeing how you've become a brave, smart young lady. I learned from the best teacher in the world. Frank smiled and squeezed his granddaughter's hand. And tomorrow, my dear, we'll start teaching others everything we know. It's going to be amazing, Grandpa. Yes, it will. It's going to be amazing. They continued walking home, lost in thoughts about the future that would begin the next day. Neither of them could have imagined that this was only the start of an even more extraordinary journey. Back at the garage, Grace stayed behind for a few minutes alone, looking at the Mustang now running perfectly. She placed her hand on the steering wheel and closed her eyes, remembering the hundreds of trips she'd taken with her husband in that same car. Thank you, Walter, she murmured, for showing me the way again. Robert approached her. Mrs. Grace, are you sure you won't regret all this? I'm absolutely sure, Robert. Today I saw a miracle happen. I saw an 8-year-old girl humble 20 experienced professionals, not out of pride or arrogance, but pure love for what she does. It's true. She's special. And Mr. Frank is special too. Together, they'll turn this garage into something unique. I hope I'm up to the responsibility you're placing on my shoulders. You will be. Do you know how I know? How? Because today you swallowed your pride and admitted a child knew more than you about something. That humility is what will make you a great leader. Robert smiled, feeling truly confident for the first time in years. See you tomorrow, Grace. Let's start building the future. See you tomorrow, Robert. The best is yet to come. She took one last look at the Mustang, started the engine to hear its perfect roar once more, and then turned it off with a satisfied smile. Tomorrow would be the first day of the rest of their lives, and she could hardly wait to see all that lay ahead. That night, in their respective homes, everyone involved in the story of that day slept with hearts full of hope and anticipation. Emily dreamed she was teaching other boys and girls how to fix engines. Frank dreamed he was young again, working side by side with his granddaughter in a bright garage. Grace dreamed of her husband smiling proudly, approving everything she had decided to do. And Robert, for the first time in 5 years, did not dream of the daughter he had lost. Instead, he dreamed of all the sons and daughters he could still help find their way in life. It was the end of an extraordinary day, and the beginning of an even more extraordinary story. 6 months later, Wilson's garage had completely transformed. What was once a simple shed with outdated equipment had become a modern complex with classrooms, hands-on labs, a technical library, and a lounge area where students and teachers could exchange experiences. The training program created by Frank Johnson had attracted young people from all over the region. The unique methodology he developed, combining traditional techniques with methods adapted for different learning styles, had become a national benchmark. Emily, now 9 years old, was the star of the program. Her natural talent, combined with the systematic teaching of her grandfather and the other mechanics, had developed impressively. She not only fixed engines with the skill of an experienced professional, but had also developed a special ability to teach other young people. "Listen up, everyone," she said to a group of teenagers on a Saturday morning. "Let's begin today's lesson on auditory diagnostics." The 15 young people, aged 14 to 18, gathered around the workbench where a car engine with intentionally created problems stood. "Who can tell me the first step in diagnosing an engine issue?" Emily asked. "Listening," they all answered in unison, already familiar with the teaching method. "Very good. And how do we listen to an engine?" "With attention, patience, and no rush," they chorused again. Emily smiled. It was amazing how her grandfather's lessons multiplied through her to dozens of other young people. "That's right. Now let's listen to this engine and see what it has to tell us." She started the engine, which produced an irregular, distinctive noise. The students focused, some closing their eyes to concentrate better on the sound. "Marina," Emily said, turning to a 17-year-old girl, "what do you hear?" "There's a metallic noise that shouldn't be there," Marina answered confidently. "Very good. And where do you think the problem is?" "In the cylinder head area on the right side." "Excellent diagnosis, you're right." Frank, who was observing the lesson from a respectful distance, smiled proudly. His granddaughter had not only become an exceptional mechanic, but also a natural teacher. "Now, Charles," Emily said, addressing a 15-year-old boy, "can you tell me what specific issue is causing that noise?" Charles furrowed his brow, concentrating. "I think it's a misadjusted valve." "Almost right. But think a little more. What else could cause a similar noise? A loose rocker arm?" "Exactly. And how can we be sure which one it is?" "By doing a compression test?" "That's right. Let's run the test and see who's right." While the students conducted the test under Emily's supervision, Frank approached Grace, who was also observing the class. "She's becoming a better teacher than I ever was," he said proudly. "She learned from the best," Grace replied, "but there's something special in her that can't be taught. She has a gift for making people feel capable." "That's true. Yesterday, she told me she wants to create a special program for visually impaired kids interested in mechanics." "Really? What an amazing idea." "She said if I could keep working as a mechanic even without my sight, others can too. She wants to develop techniques specifically for people like me." Grace was moved by the girl's generosity and vision. "What do you think of the idea?" "I think it's brilliant. In fact, I've already started working with her on developing the program. We want to launch it next year." At that moment, Robert approached the group, holding an envelope. "Mrs. Williams, an interesting letter arrived today." "What kind of letter?" "It's from the Department of Education. They want to learn about our program and evaluate the possibility of replicating it in other parts of the country. Grace took the letter and quickly read it, her eyes shining with emotion. They want to come here next week for a site visit. It's incredible how fast things have moved, Frank said. 6 months ago, I was just a useless old man, and now we're getting attention from the federal government. You were never useless, Mr. Johnson, Grace corrected. You just needed the right opportunity to show your worth. And the right person to give me that opportunity, he added, clearly referring to her. Emily's class was interrupted by a joyful exclamation. I did it, Marina shouted. The engine is running perfectly now. Everyone crowded around to listen to the engine, which now purred smoothly without any irregular noises. Congratulations, Marina, Emily said. You made a perfect diagnosis and an impeccable repair. Thanks, Professor Val. Emily laughed. The students had started calling her Professor Val, and the nickname had stuck. Everyone, she said to the class, you can see how important it is to be patient and methodical. Marina didn't rush, listened carefully, made the right diagnosis and executed the repair precisely. That's how you work with engines. And that's how you work with life, Frank added, joining the group. Hi, Grandpa, Emily said, running to hug him. Hi, sweetheart, how was class? Great. Marina fixed the Beetle's engine all by herself. That's wonderful. And how did you do as a teacher? I think well, but I still have a lot to learn from you. You sure do, but you're on the right path. Grace watched the interaction between grandfather and granddaughter with unending emotion. Seeing those two together was like watching the future and the past connecting in perfect harmony. Mr. Johnson, she said, may I speak with you privately? Of course, Mrs. Williams. They stepped away from the group and walked to the garage office. What is it, Mrs. Williams? I wanted to talk about Emily's future. What kind of future? Formal education. She's a brilliant girl, and though she's learning a lot here at the garage, she also needs traditional academic schooling. Frank sighed. I know. It's something that weighs on me every day. But I don't have the means to pay for a good private school, and the public schools around here aren't great. What if I told you I know an excellent school that would love to have Emily as a student? What school? St. Mary's Academy. It's one of the best private schools in the city. The principal is a personal friend of mine. They have a special program for kids with unique talents. Mrs. Williams, that must be very expensive. Leave the financial matters to me. Emily is an investment in the future, not just hers, but all of ours. Frank fell silent for a moment, clearly moved by the generosity of the offer. Would she agree to study there and keep working here? Not only would she agree, but she'd be encouraged to. The school has a policy of integrating academic education with practical skills. Emily would be a perfect fit for that program. And what does Emily think about it? I haven't spoken to her yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Let's talk to her together. They returned to the main garage, where Emily was still guiding the students through hands-on exercises. Emily, Frank called, can you come here for a minute? Of course, Grandpa. She approached, curious about the serious expressions on the adults' faces. Mrs. Williams wants to talk to you about something important. What is it? About school, Grace said gently. School? But I already go to the school in our neighborhood. I know, but what if there was a better school, where you could learn more things and meet other bright kids like you? Emily furrowed her brow, thoughtful. Would I have to stop coming here to the garage? No. You'd keep coming here every afternoon and on weekends. School would be in the mornings. And would it be far from home? A little far, but we'd arrange transportation. And would it cost a lot of money? Don't worry about that, Grace said. What matters is whether you want this opportunity. Emily looked at her grandfather, seeking guidance. What do you think, Grandpa? I think you deserve every opportunity you can get. You're a special girl, Emily, and special kids need special education. But what if I don't fit in? What if the other kids don't like me? If it doesn't work out, you can go back to your old school, Grace said. And as for the other kids not liking you, that's impossible. You're sweet, smart, and brave. Anyone would be lucky to be your friend. Emily thought for a few seconds. Can I try it? Of course you can, Grace replied with a smile. We'll schedule a visit for next week. You'll see the school, meet the teachers, and some kids your age. Okay, but I want to keep teaching here too. You will, Frank assured her. In fact, you might even develop your teaching skills further at the new school. How so? Maybe you could create a project to teach other kids at the school about basic mechanics, Grace suggested. It'd be a way to share your knowledge with more people. Emily's eyes lit up at the possibility. That would be amazing. Imagine how many kids could learn useful things. Exactly, Frank said proudly. You could be a bridge between two worlds, the academic and the practical. At that moment, Charles approached the group with a worried expression. Sorry to interrupt, but there's a problem outside. What kind of problem? Robert asked, joining them. Some men showed up saying they represent a big chain of garages from Chicago. They want to talk about absorbing our operation. Grace and Frank exchanged concerned glances. What kind of absorption? Grace asked. They weren't very specific, but by the tone of their voices, it doesn't sound like a friendly offer. Let's see what they want, Robert said, walking toward the garage entrance. Outside, 3 men in suits stood waiting beside a black car with tinted windows. The man in the middle, apparently the leader, was tall and thin, with slicked-back grey hair and an arrogant expression. Good afternoon, he said with a fake smile. My name is Edward Sterling. I represent the Autoprime network. I'm here to make a business proposal. What kind of proposal? Robert asked directly. We know you've been getting a lot of attention lately. Training programs, investments, government recognition. It's impressive what you've managed to build here. Thank you, said Grace diplomatically, but I still haven't heard a specific proposal. The proposal is simple, said Edward, dropping his fake smile. You sell the operation to us at a fair price, and we incorporate everything into our network. You keep working here, but as our employees. And why would we do that? Asked Frank, who had stepped forward with Emily. Edward looked at Frank with obvious disdain. Because you don't have the structure to expand this nationally. You're simple people, no business vision. We have the capital, experience, and connections to take this program across the United States. And if we're not interested? Grace asked coldly. That would be a shame, said Edward, a subtle threat in his voice. The market can be very competitive. It'd be terrible if you started having supplier issues, or if other garages in the area began offering similar services at lower prices. The silence that followed was tense. Everyone understood the nature of the threat perfectly. Mr. Edward, Emily suddenly spoke up, stepping toward the man. Can I ask you something? Edward looked at the girl with surprise and irritation. What's a child doing in an adult conversation? I work here, Emily replied simply. And I wanted to know, do you understand engines? I understand business, Edward answered impatiently. I don't need to know engines to run a garage chain. Oh, I see, Emily said with calculated innocence. Then you wouldn't be able to tell me why your car's engine is having trouble. My car's engine is just fine. No, it's not. There's an ignition misfire that's going to leave you stranded soon. Edward laughed dismissively. Kid, my car is brand new, serviced at the dealership. There's nothing wrong with it. Want a bet? Emily asked. Bet what? If I'm right about your car's problem, you leave and never come back here. If I'm wrong, my grandpa will talk about your proposal. Frank tried to intervene. Emily, you don't have to. Let me, Grandpa, I know what I'm doing. Edward looked at the girl with a mix of disbelief and amusement. Fine, kid. You've got 3 minutes to diagnose my car. When you fail, I expect all the adults here to sit down and talk seriously. Emily walked up to the black car and leaned her ear close to the hood. Can you start the engine, please? Edward turned the key, and the car started normally. To everyone present, the engine sounded perfect. Emily listened carefully for a few seconds, then stepped back. The problem is in the third spark plug, she said confidently. It's got excessive carbon buildup and will fail completely in the next few days. That's ridiculous, Edward said. The engine is running perfectly. It's running now, but when you accelerate hard or go up a hill, you'll feel the issue. That's impossible to... Edward was cut off by a sputtering noise from the engine. Suddenly, the car began to misfire, then died completely. The silence that followed was absolute. Edward tried starting the car several times, but the engine only turned over without catching. How How did you know? He asked, genuinely shocked. Because I listen to what engines say, Emily replied simply. The third plug's been sending signals for a while. You just didn't know how to listen. Edward got out of the car, clearly unsettled. That was a coincidence. It was knowledge, Frank corrected proudly. Something you can't buy or sell, Mr. Edward. Grace approached Edward with a cold smile. Now, about your business proposal. The answer is no. And I suggest you honor the agreement you made with a 9-year-old. Edward looked around, seeing the expressions of contempt on everyone's faces. He had been humiliated by a little girl in front of his subordinates. This isn't over, he muttered. Yes, it is, said Robert, stepping forward, and if you try any kind of retaliation, we'll make it public that the great businessman Edward Sterling was outsmarted by a 9-year-old on technical matters. Edward climbed into his subordinate's car, which had been hastily called and left without another word. When the car disappeared from sight, everyone erupted in celebration. Emily, that was amazing, said Charles. How did you catch such a subtle problem? Asked Mike, genuinely impressed. It wasn't hard, explained Emily. When someone lies about not having problems, the problems usually show up faster. How so? Asked Grace, intrigued. The engine already had a bad spark plug but was still running. When the man spoke so confidently that there was no issue, I knew he was pushing the engine beyond normal to prove he was right. That sped up the spark plug's failure. Frank laughed loudly. My granddaughter isn't just an exceptional mechanic, she's also a motorcycle psychologist. And a natural negotiator, added Grace. She solved a problem that could have given us a lot of headaches. Do you think they'll try to retaliate? Asked Robert, concerned. I doubt it, replied Grace. Men like Edward Sterling fear public exposure. They prefer easier targets. But if they do, pressed Robert. If they do, we'll face them, said Frank firmly. We've been through worse. Emily walked up to her grandfather and took his hand. Grandpa, were you proud of me? Prouder than you can imagine, my dear. You didn't just defend our garage. You showed that wisdom and courage matter more than money and arrogance. I learned from the best teacher in the world. And you're becoming an even better one. Grace watched the scene with deep emotion. In less than a year, that garage had gone from a failing business to a nationally recognized center of excellence. And it had all started with a brave girl who dared to challenge 20 grown men. Everyone, she said, I think today proved we're on the right path. Let's keep building something special here, something no big company can buy or copy. What's that? Asked Charles. Authenticity, she replied. Real knowledge, genuine passion, and love for what we do. And more importantly, added Frank, respect for people, no matter their age or background. Emily smiled, looking around at everyone who had become her extended family. You know what I love most about this garage, she said. What? Several asked at once. Here, everyone matters. Everyone has something to teach and something to learn. No one laughs at anyone for being different. And that's why this will always be a special place, said Grace, because special people aren't born special. They become special when they find the right place to grow. As the sun set behind the industrial buildings of Detroit that evening, everyone knew they had found their right place to grow. And more importantly, they knew that together they could face any challenge the future might bring. 2 years later, the story of the little mechanic who stood up to the professionals had spread across the country. Wilson's Garage had become a national model for vocational training, receiving visitors from other states and even other countries interested in replicating the program. Emily, now 11 years old, was in 7th grade at St. Mary's Academy, where she had started a mechanics club that attracted dozens of curious students. At the same time, she remained the lead instructor for the garage's training program, specializing in teaching children and teenagers. Frank had become a nationally respected figure, giving lectures at universities and technical schools, and had written a book about his teaching methodology adapted for people with visual impairments. The book became a reference in the field and was being translated into other languages. Grace had founded an organization to expand the model to other cities, always focusing on training not just skilled technicians, but also conscientious and compassionate citizens. Robert had grown into an experienced manager, overseeing an operation that employed over 50 people and served students from across the Southeast. One Friday morning, as Emily was teaching a group of children aged 8 to 12, news arrived that would once again change the course of their lives. "Miss Emily," said Marina, now 19 and one of the most talented instructors at the garage, "there's a letter for you." "A letter? Who would send me a letter?" "It's from the federal government. It has the Department of Education seal." Emily paused the lesson and opened the letter curiously. As she read, her eyes widened in surprise. "What is it, sweetheart?" asked Frank, who had noticed his granddaughter's excitement. "Grandpa, they want to give me an honorary medal for educational merit. They say I'm the youngest person in U.S. history to receive this honor." "My goodness," Marina exclaimed. "That's incredible." Grace, who had just arrived for a meeting, heard the commotion and approached the group. "What happened?" "Mrs. Williams," Emily said, still in shock, "the government wants to give me a medal, and they want me to go to Washington, D.C. to receive it in person." "Let me see that letter," Grace said, quickly scanning it. "Emily, this is extraordinary. You're going to be decorated by the president." The news spread quickly through the garage. Within minutes, all the employees, instructors, and students had gathered around Emily, celebrating the achievement. "Everyone," Robert said, clapping to get their attention, "this is a proud moment for all of us, but especially for you, Mr. Frank. Your granddaughter is being recognized nationwide for the exceptional work she's done." Frank couldn't hold back his tears. "I never imagined I'd live to see my little girl honored by the whole country." "Grandpa, I wouldn't have achieved any of this without you," Emily said, hugging him. "And without Mrs. Williams," Frank added. "If she hadn't believed in us from day one." "And without all of you," Emily said, looking around at everyone present. "Every person here played a part in this." "When's the ceremony?" asked Charles. "A month from now in Washington, D.C., Grace replied, still reading the letter. "And they want you to bring some of the people who are important in your development." "Then we're all going to Washington, D.C., Marina exclaimed. "All of us?" Emily asked, surprised. "Of course," Grace said. "This is a recognition for our whole team. We'll make it an educational trip to the capital." The idea was met with enthusiasm by everyone. Over the next few weeks, preparations for the trip took over the garage. Emily grew nervous about receiving such a prestigious honor, but was also immensely proud of the recognition. "Grandpa," she said one afternoon as they worked together on an engine, "do you think I deserve this medal?" "My dear Emily, you don't just deserve it. You should have received it long ago. What you've done here has changed hundreds of lives. But I only did what I learned from you." "No, Emily. You've done so much more. You took what you learned from me and multiplied it 1,000 times. You created your own way of teaching, your own way of seeing the world." "What do you mean?" "You taught adults humility, gave young people confidence, and showed children how to believe in themselves. That's not something you learn from a book. It's a gift you developed on your own." Emily smiled, feeling truly understood. "I just want to keep helping people discover they're capable of amazing things." "And that's exactly what you'll do for the rest of your life," Frank said with certainty. "People like you are born to make a difference in the world." On the day of the trip to Washington, D.C., Wilson's garage closed early so everyone could attend. The chartered bus was packed with students, former students, staff, and their families. It was a true caravan of hope heading to the nation's capital. During the ride, Emily sat beside her grandfather and Grace, reflecting on everything that had happened over the years. "Grace," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear." "Do you regret investing so much money in the garage?" Grace smiled warmly. "Emily, it was the best investment I've ever made. Not just financially, but emotionally. You gave me a new purpose, a reason to keep living with joy." "And for me," Frank added, "you gave me back my dignity and my usefulness." "And for me," Emily said, "you gave me a bigger family than I ever dreamed of having." The ceremony in Washington, D.C. was moving. Emily, wearing a navy blue dress Grace had picked especially for the occasion, stepped onto the stage at the White House with Frank and Grace beside her. When the president placed the medal around the 11-year-old's neck, the entire audience rose in applause. Many had tears in their eyes, touched by the extraordinary story of this unlikely family. "Emily Johnson," the president said in his speech, "you represent the very best of the American spirit, the ability to overcome limitations, turn challenges into opportunities, and use individual talent to benefit society as a whole. "Thank you, Mr. President," Emily replied with her usual sincerity, "but I didn't do anything alone. Everything I've achieved is thanks to the people who believed in me and taught me that age and social status don't define a person's worth." Her words were broadcast live and quickly went viral. The story of the young mechanic had touched millions of hearts across the country. After the ceremony, during the government reception, Emily was approached by journalists, educators, and politicians eager to hear more. "What's your next goal?" a reporter asked. "To keep learning and teaching," Emily answered, "and to help open more garages like ours in other cities. What advice would you give to other kids who feel different or misunderstood?" Emily thought for a moment before answering. "I'd say being different isn't a problem, it's a gift. The important thing is finding people who see that difference as something special, not something wrong. And where do we find those people? Sometimes they're closer than we think. Sometimes they show up when we least expect them. The important thing is never to stop being who we truly are." The interview was reproduced in newspapers across the country and became one of the most shared quotes of the year. On the trip back to Detroit, the bus was in celebration. Everyone sang, told jokes, and celebrated not just Emily's medal, but the fact that they were part of something bigger than themselves. "Grandpa," said Emily, nestled against Frank's shoulder, "are you happy?" "Happier than I ever thought possible, my dear granddaughter." "Me too. But you know what makes me happiest?" "What?" "Knowing this is just the beginning. We're going to do so many more amazing things together." "I'm sure we will, Emily. I'm sure we will." The bus rolled down the dark road, illuminated from within by the joy of people who had discovered that together they were capable of extraordinary things. Outside, the stars shone like tiny medals in the sky, bearing witness to another chapter in the story of those who dared to dream big and work hard to turn dreams into reality. 5 years later, at 16, Emily had become the youngest international speaker on technical education in the world. Her teaching method had been implemented in over 200 US cities and was being adapted for other countries. Frank, now 81, remained active as a consultant and mentor, having trained more than 2,000 young people in his second career. His book had sold over 100,000 copies and become required reading in education courses. Grace had built a national network of workshop schools that employed more than 3,000 people and served over 15,000 students a year. Her foundation had become an international benchmark for humanized vocational education. Robert now ran an operation that had grown far beyond his most optimistic expectations, yet he never lost focus on the human quality that set his work apart. One Saturday afternoon, as Emily gave a talk to a group of business owners interested in replicating the model in their companies, an unexpected visitor arrived at the garage. It was Edward Sterling, the man who 5 years earlier had tried to aggressively buy out the business. But now he seemed different, humbler, less arrogant. "Good afternoon," he said to Charles, who recognized him immediately. "I'd like to speak with Mrs. Williams, if possible." Charles hesitated, remembering the events of years past. "May I ask what it's about?" "It's personal, but I can assure you my intentions are peaceful this time." Charles went to get Grace, who was surprised by the visit. "What does he want?" she asked. "He said it's something personal." Grace decided to see him, but asked Charles to stay close in case there was trouble. "Mr. Sterling," she said politely, "how can I help you?" Edward looked visibly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Williams, I came here to apologize for my behavior years ago." "Apologize?" "Yes. I was wrong about everything. How I approached you, how I underestimated your work, and most of all, how I treated that extraordinary girl." Grace studied him silently, trying to understand his intentions. "What changed, Mr. Sterling?" "My daughter. She's 16 and always struggled in school. This year she enrolled in one of the programs inspired by your model and she completely changed." Edward paused, clearly emotional. "For the first time in her life, she feels capable, smart, valued. She's learning carpentry at a workshop school in Pittsburgh and discovered she has an incredible talent for woodworking." "That's wonderful for her," Grace said sincerely. When she found out I'd been here before, she made me promise to come back and apologize. She said people like you deserve recognition, not hostility. Your daughter seems like a very wise young woman. Yes, and she learned that wisdom in a place that works exactly like this one. A place where people are valued for what they can offer, not for what they lack. At that moment, Emily arrived from her lecture, and upon seeing Edward, recognized him immediately. "Hi," she said simply. "You're the man with the car that had the spark plug issue." Edward smiled sheepishly. "Yes, I am. And you're the girl who taught me the greatest lesson in humility of my life." "What lesson?" "That true knowledge has no age, and that arrogance is always a sign of ignorance." Emily smiled. "And did you really learn the lesson?" "I did. So much so that my company now funds 3 workshop schools in the countryside near Chicago." "Really? That's so cool! And I came here with a proposal, not to buy this time, but to partner." Grace raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What kind of partnership?" "We want to create an investment fund to expand your model to other countries. You'd retain full control over the methodology and management. We'd only provide the capital and logistical support." "Why would you do that?" "Because we've found that investing in transformative education is more profitable in the long run than any other kind of business. And also because it's the right thing to do." Emily looked at Grace, then at Edward. "Mr. Edward, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you change your mind about us?" Edward took a deep breath. "Because you showed me I was wrong about almost everything in life. I used to think success was just money and power. You showed me that success is making a difference in people's lives. And now you want to make a difference too." "I do. And I want my daughter to grow up in a world where there are more places like this." Grace stepped closer to Emily. "What do you think, our little founding partner?" Emily laughed at the description. "I think everyone deserves a second chance. If Mr. Edward has really changed, maybe we can help many more people together." "So is it accepted?" Edward asked hopefully. "Under a few conditions," Grace said. "Which are?" "First, all new projects must uphold the same human-centered values we've developed here. Second, a percentage of profits must always be reinvested in scholarships for underprivileged youth. Third, Emily must personally approve each new location before it opens." "I accept all conditions," Edward said without hesitation. Emily stepped forward and extended her hand. "Then welcome to the family, Mr. Edward." Edward shook the girl's hand, feeling truly honored by the acceptance. "Thank you, Emily. I promise you won't regret it." "We know," she said with the natural confidence that always defined her, "because now you know what we've always known, that people matter more than business." That afternoon, as the details of the new partnership were discussed, Frank watched everything from his favorite chair in the garage, listening to the excited voices planning the future. "What are you thinking about, Master Frank?" Marina asked, approaching him. "I'm thinking life is full of surprises. Who would have thought the man who tried to harm us years ago would come back to help us grow even more? It's true, people really can change. They can. And do you know why? Why? Because when they encounter examples of true kindness, they discover they can be good too." Marina smiled, touched by the old man's wisdom. "Do you think our story will have a happy ending?" "Marina, our story has no ending. Every day we help someone discover their potential. Every young person we turn into a skilled professional and conscientious citizen. Every life we touch. It all lives on forever." "How so?" "Because the good we do multiplies. The people we help will help others, who will help others, and so on endlessly. We're not just building a garage or a school, we're building a better future." Marina looked around, seeing Emily explaining something to Edward, Grace chatting excitedly with Robert about new projects, and dozens of young people working intently on their lessons. "Thank you, Master Frank." "For what?" "For teaching me that I can be part of something bigger than myself." Frank smiled, remembering how years ago he thought his life had lost all meaning. Now, at 81, he felt more useful and fulfilled than ever before. As the sun set once more over Detroit, Wilson's garage continued running at full speed. In the bays, young apprentices worked under the guidance of experienced mentors. In the classrooms, children discovered talents they never knew they had. In the office, adults planned ways to bring this magic to even more places, and at the center of it all was a 16-year-old girl who had once been ridiculed by 20 grown men, but was now respected and admired by thousands around the world. But to her, the most important thing wasn't the awards, fame, or recognition. What mattered most was that every night when she came home, she could sit beside her grandfather on the porch and tell him about another life they had transformed together. "Grandpa," she said that evening, "are you proud of how our story turned out?" "My dear granddaughter," Frank replied with a wise smile, "our story isn't over. It's only just beginning." And indeed it was, because stories of love, courage, and determination never end. They multiply, spread, inspire other stories, and live on in the hearts of all who believe it's possible to change the world, one person at a time. The end of the story. Now tell me what you thought of this touching story. Do you believe Emily and Frank proved that talent and determination have no age limit? Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know what other values you found in this journey. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other inspiring stories like this one.